To some degree, the question of reward systems and the effect upon performances has become a bit of a holy grail in this area. This has been an ongoing fascination for management, naturally so, for quite some time. And after decades when reward systems, pay systems, as we used to call them, were simply seen as a largely back office activity, a hygiene factor, something that we had to do because we had to engage in this transaction, otherwise people wouldn't come to work. The aim to derive real performance gains through the deliberate use of reward systems was seen as a fundamental part of the strategic orientation for reward systems. So it became part of the raison d'etre of what modern reward systems have been about. And as such, it's been a part of the fashion of management, a very enduring part of the fashion of management, but a very clear focus for what management, what organisations want out of rewards for quite some considerable time. So we're just going to try and unpack some of the issues around reward and performance. What is the relationship between these two things? Can we derive enhanced performance of employees by using reward systems in various ways? What are the limits? What are the shortcomings? What do we not know about this area? Are the claims that are often made in this area substantial? Are they something that we can rely on? So we're going to think about the nature of performance, about where performance comes from within organisations, and then how that might relate to reward systems and how we can use reward systems to play into that process of enhanced performance. So when we think about employee performance, we typically think about a combination of factors. We think about a person's skills, their ability to actually undertake the kinds of tasks that we need them to perform. We think about their knowledge of facts, of rules, of principles, of procedures. And we think about their motivation to perform, and that it's only through the combination of these three elements, broadly, ability plus motivation, that results in employee performance. So if we're thinking about how reward systems might play into this, about how reward systems might have a positive impact, then we've got to think about how rewards can help us achieve these underlying elements of performance. So how do we get hold of the kinds of employees that have the requisite skills, ability, and knowledge? And once we've got them, how do we keep them? You know, we get them through the door, that's one thing, and reward may have a role to play in that, but also reward has to have a more enduring role in ensuring that those good people stay with us. And if performance is about skills and knowledge, then it's also about the development of skills and knowledge, because performance is dynamic, it's not static. People don't just come into our organisation with a certain amount of talent, or their skills, their knowledge, and then that's it. We often need them to go on to develop, to become more knowledgeable, more skillful. So to what extent can reward help us with those aspects that sees the development of employees as an ongoing issue? Is reward capable of assisting in that process? And the final thing is, to what extent can rewards motivate employees to perform well in their job? That they're not just good at getting people who are capable of doing this, but actually of encouraging people to make use of those capabilities, to put their skills and talents into action. So, what is the evidence? What do we know about what reward can do in this area? If we take the broad question, can reward enhance performance? The broadest answer that we can give to that is a kind of qualified yes. There is evidence to suggest that is the case. Mark Huselit's important analysis of high-performance work practices identifies the linkage of performance and pay as one of those key high-performance work practices. That organisations that have these links, that use pay in this way, tend to have higher levels of performance. Now, of course, these kinds of performances were at the organisational level. There wasn't a kind of drill down into how that works at the level of individual employees. But at a broad level, we can answer the question as to whether or not the reward assists organisations to perform with a general yes. We know that different forms of pay, so merit pay schemes, performance-related pay schemes, as they're sometimes called, the profit sharing and gain sharing schemes, these variable approaches to reward, where we have aspects of the reward package that might go up, they might even go down sometimes, but those variable elements of reward are linked to performance increases. That if we associate bits of pay with the achievement of certain types of performance, whether that's individual performance through merit pay schemes, whether it's group or organisational level performance through profit or gain sharing schemes, that does seem to have some impact upon the performance itself. And the work of people like Henneman and Cook has provided some evidence to support this. We also know that in broad terms, having variable elements of pay seems to have a particularly strong motivational impact. That if we have elements of pay that can go up and down, then those bits of the pay system tend to have a stronger impact upon people than altering base pay. That altering base pay tends to get factored into what people think about, well, it's just background noise, whereas variable pay remains more of a kind of current issue, as Gerhardt and Milkovich identified. When we drill down into some of those other elements that I mentioned a moment ago, we can start to put a little bit of meat onto the bone. So, good performance requires good staff. It requires staff with high levels of skill and so on. So, do reward systems, do they help us to get those kinds of people? Now, we know through the work of people like Cable and Judge that rewards can help organisations to distinguish themselves in the labour market. That different types of reward systems tend to attract different types of personalities to organisations. So, for example, as Zenger discussed, very talented employees are attracted by organisations that have reward systems that possess a strong link between pay and performance. Quite naturally, we know that very talented employees will typically have quite a high level of confidence about what performance they will be able to attain, and so they'll look at the prospects of a performance-linked reward with quite a degree of optimism that they will be able to achieve all that scheme has on offer, whereas maybe employees who are less naturally talented or maybe have a different view about their talent may view the same kinds of schemes with more of a degree of trepidation. When it comes to keeping employees, again, we know that different types of rewards have differential types of effects. So that when we look at those organisations that have these individual performance-based pay systems, that tends to encourage poor performers out of the organisation rather quicker than good performers. Conversely, good individual performers tend to stop performing and often leave organisations where there are group performance-based pay schemes. So some of these findings reflect what we've already discussed in terms of tournament theory, in terms of encouraging these kinds of individualistic behaviours. We can orient our reward systems in order to encourage certain types of personalities, to encourage certain types of behaviours, and that can tend to have a sort of filtering effect within the organisation. Whether those are the correct kinds of behaviours, the most valuable kinds of behaviours that we want for our organisation is a matter of strategic design, and it's not simply to be taken as read that that's the be-all and end-all of success, because different organisations might require different types of behaviours and maybe not individual performative behaviours. But nevertheless, there's some evidence to suggest that those reward systems can help us get and keep certain types of individuals who we might regard as being valuable. When it comes to the idea of skill development, whether we can use rewards in order to encourage skill development, there's less clear evidence in relation to this. There is some evidence that perhaps we can use rewards to improve quality, which may be reflective of skill development, but the jury's a little more, the jury's somewhat out on this particular question. The final area of consideration is probably the most controversial. This question of whether or not reward systems can encourage and motivate on-the-job performance. It's one thing to get people in place who are attracted by certain types of reward schemes, but it's another thing to actually be able to identify the impact in motivational terms of reward systems on the performance of people in the act of undertaking their job. Now, in general terms, we know that people like the principle of the link between pay and performance. It seems fair. It seems to have an attractive rationale to it. The problem comes when we attempt to uncover the relationship between these individual performance-based pay systems and the performance of individuals. The evidence has always been pretty thin on the ground to identify a very strong or clear link between one thing and another. And one troubling thing that seems to keep cropping up within the literature is about the unintended consequences of these types of schemes. So we know, for instance, that where we have pay schemes that attempt to be very closely related to the achievement of individual performance objectives, that can lead to things like tunnel vision, where people just narrow in and focus on their explicit targets, on quantifiable targets rather than qualitative aspects of the job, that it can discourage team behaviour, that it can discourage people's sense of intrinsic satisfaction with the work that they do. It's all about the transaction because we're focusing their attention in that way. So on the one hand, it's not clear that we're getting these positive motivations to encourage performance, and on the other hand, there are troubling concerns that there may be all kinds of unanticipated, unintended consequences. And we continue in this process of not really getting to grips with just how much success there's been in uncovering this holy grail of reward research. William Brown, writing only a few years ago, bemoaning the fact that there's been so little apparent improvement in the overall state of evidence and rationale for these kinds of reward practices and changes, that we simply don't know enough, that the evidence is too flimsy, that we're not clear about how all of these things play out. So we need to exercise a degree of caution, particularly because of the way in which these kinds of rewards have become so much part of the dominant management discourse, that this is the answer, this is a magic wand. This is the silver bullet that can solve all of our problems. And the answer is we simply don't know. We've got some hints that it can fill in some parts of the puzzle. But when it comes to the key elements of linking behaviour with a reward, it's still not clear. And there are all kinds of flashing, if not red lights, amber lights, that there are some issues, some problems with the operation of these kinds of schemes in practice.